A ship unlike any the galaxy had ever seen drifted into the Empire's territory, its black hull almost vanishing against the backdrop of space. It moved silently, a shadow amongst the stars. No alarms went off, no scanners detected its presence. Its sleek design was beyond the reach of the most advanced technologies the Empire possessed. There were no signs of life aboard, no energy readings, no communication attempts, just the stillness of the void as it approached the heart of the galaxy. At first, it seemed like a glitch or a miscalculation, a small vessel lost in the vastness of space, drifting through the system unnoticed. But the Eclipse wasn't just any ship, it was a weapon crafted with precision technology that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before, a silent predator hunting in the darkness of the stars. The Imperial fleet was accustomed to detecting any foreign ships long before they entered their borders. They had the most advanced surveillance networks in place to prevent any surprises. But this ship was different. It moved as if it had been designed to evade every kind of detection, leaving no trace of its presence until it was already too late. The Empire's fleet commanders dismissed the initial readings as a fluke. Some even speculated that it was a testing malfunction from one of their own vessels. They laughed it off, knowing no one could breach their territory unnoticed, not with their advanced ships or their armies ready to defend at any given moment. Yet something felt off as reports from various sectors kept coming in describing an unfamiliar presence, but no one was able to find anything. Deep within the heart of the Empire's command center, General Morvis watched the reports come in with growing concern. He had spent years securing the Empire's reign over the galaxy, and the thought of a single unknown ship slipping through their defenses was not something he could ignore. He ordered the fleet's most advanced scanning systems to sweep the sector, but it was as if the ship was a ghost. Only traces of its wake could be found, and nothing more. The Eclipse glided deeper into Imperial space, the silence around it becoming more oppressive with each passing moment. Inside the ship, its pilot, a lone human, sat in a cockpit surrounded by screens and controls. The face of the pilot remained hidden under the shadows of a hood, yet their presence was unmistakable. A calm aura radiated from them as they gently adjusted the ship's course, their fingers moving deftly across the controls. The human pilot had a mission, a purpose that stretched far beyond the borders of the galaxy. This was not an invasion, nor an act of aggression. This was a test, a challenge placed against the might of an empire that believed itself untouchable. The pilot was not concerned with the Empire's reach or its technology. They had come for one reason, only to show that even the most powerful of empires could be shattered by a single determined soul. A blip flashed across one of the screens, alerting the pilot of the presence of a small fleet moving in from the Empire's outer rim, their trajectory aligned, as if they were headed straight toward the unknown ship. But the pilot didn't flinch. Their hands moved over the controls with expert precision, guiding the Eclipse effortlessly around the incoming vessels. It was time to begin the first step of the plan, and the Empire wouldn't know what hit them. As the fleet continued its approach, unaware of the true threat, the Eclipse prepared to strike silently like a predator waiting to pounce, and the galaxy would soon learn just how powerful a single human could be. The Empire's fleet moved with precision toward what they believed was nothing more than a stray anomaly, just another lost ship wandering too close to their territory. But their arrogance blinded them to the real danger they were walking into. As the Eclipse drifted silently through the stars, the fleet continued its course, unaware that the shadows around them had already begun to shift. Inside the command center of the Empire's central hub, General Morvis paced back and forth, his mind racing as the reports of the mysterious vessel continued to flood in. His officers had been quick to dismiss it as a glitch in the system, but something didn't sit right with him. The readings were off. There were no traces of any known ship signatures, no energy readings, nothing familiar at all. He clenched his fists and stared at the empty space on the screens. It was as if the ship had just materialized out of thin air. Morvis wasn't one to ignore a threat, and his instincts told him that this was no coincidence. The Empire's intelligence network was vast and sophisticated. There was no way a ship could sneak through their sensors unnoticed, not unless it was something far beyond their understanding. He had seen strange things before in his years of service, but nothing like this. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary ship or pilot. He ordered the fleet to intercept the unknown vessel, immediately sending his best ships to deal with the intruder. The Empire's elite fleet, commanded by Admiral Varix, was summoned to the front lines. Varix was a legend among the Empire's commanders, known for his tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. If anyone could handle a potential threat like this, it was him. Varix stood before his fleet, surveying the large holographic map of the sector. As his officers reported in, the situation was growing increasingly urgent. The unknown ship had somehow disabled their long-range scans and was now making its way toward the heart of the Empire's territory. The fleet was ready, but Varix knew that this would not be a simple battle. "Prepare the fleet for engagement." Varix's voice was calm, but his eyes burned with determination. He had never encountered an enemy quite like this one, but he was confident in his strategy. "We will crush this threat quickly and decisively." His ships moved into position surrounding the area where the eclipse had last been detected. The Empire's ships were massive, towering warships, bristling with weapons, powerful shields, and reinforced hulls. They were a symbol of the Empire's might. No one had ever dared challenge them, but this human pilot was different. Varix's ships moved into formation, their sensors on full alert, prepared to catch the elusive eclipse. What they didn't know was that the human pilot was already well aware of their approach, and the trap was already set. The fleet thought they had the advantage, but the pilot had studied their movements and knew exactly how they would respond. The eclipse was already moving faster than their scanners could adjust, its cloaking systems keeping it a step ahead. The first Empire ship moved into position, and the eclipse was already gone before the crew even knew what had happened. The ship had vanished, slipping silently into the void, as if it had never been there at all. The Empire's fleet was left stunned and confused as they tried to adjust their scanners, searching for any sign of the ship that had outmaneuvered them completely. Then, in an instant, a flare of light erupted in the distance. One of the Empire's smaller vessels, a scout ship, was torn apart in a single explosion. The eclipse had appeared out of nowhere and with deadly accuracy had disabled the ship in the blink of an eye. The shockwave rippled through the fleet as Varix's officers scrambled to regain control of the situation. "Find it. Lock onto it." Varix shouted, his voice cold and steady, but his mind was racing. There was no time for hesitation. The fleet had to adapt, but the eclipse was always one step ahead. No one could track it. The battle had begun, and the Empire was facing a threat they couldn't even comprehend. The moment the first explosion tore through the emptiness of space, chaos erupted within the Empire's fleet. Varix's flagship, the Titan's Wrath, was positioned at the heart of the formation. His officers scrambled to regain control, but the eclipse had already vanished back into the blackness, leaving only the wreckage of the scout ship behind. The remaining ships, once a symbol of the Empire's unchallenged superiority, were now disoriented, vulnerable to a threat they couldn't see. Varix's voice cut through the panic in the command center. "Do not lose your composure. We will not be outwitted by one ship. We have the advantage." But even his calm demeanor couldn't mask the unease spreading among the fleet. For the first time in years, the Empire's finest were outmatched. The fleet, now reeling from the first strike, began to spread out in search of the eclipse, but every scan returned only emptiness. No traces, no heat signatures, no sign of the enemy ship. It was as if it had simply ceased to exist. But then, without warning, another flash of light burst in the distance. This time, it was a medium-class battleship, a formidable vessel by any standard, that was disabled in a single shot. The ship's outer defenses were shattered, its engines left inoperable, drifting helplessly in the vastness of space. "Deploy the long-range drones," Varix ordered, his mind already calculating their next move. "We need eyes on the enemy. Send out everything we have." The fleet responded immediately, launching drones and scouts, each designed to detect the faintest fluctuations in the ship's energy. The eclipse wasn't just eluding them, it was playing with them. The human pilot had already anticipated this, already thought through every countermeasure they could employ. As soon as the drones were launched, they were swarmed by a series of blinding flashes. The eclipse had appeared again, this time cutting through the outer edges of the fleet, disabling another ship, this one a dreadnought. The giant warship fell silent as its engines flickered and died, falling into the pull of a nearby moon, where it would drift aimlessly unless salvaged. Varix watched, his mind racing. He had to act. This was no longer about fighting a battle. This was about survival. He knew his fleet was being methodically picked apart, and their coordinated tactics, designed to fight overwhelming odds, were being torn apart one piece at a time. The eclipse had proven its ability to strike with surgical precision, exploiting every weakness in the Empire's defenses without hesitation. "We are losing control," one of his officers muttered, eyes glued to the empty space where the eclipse had been moments before. Varix turned sharply toward him. "Do not speak of defeat. We will win this. We have the numbers. We have the firepower. Now focus." Varix's words were firm, but even he could feel the creeping doubt. His fleet was slowly being whittled down, and every time they thought they had found the eclipse, it vanished before they could fire a shot. In the distance, the eclipse slipped in and out of their radar range, a phantom that haunted their every move. The human pilot had made it clear that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were proving a point. One ship, one person, had entered the heart of the Empire and struck at its very core. The fleet was being shattered, its pride stripped away by the efficiency of the lone human ship. Varix's eyes narrowed as he looked at the fleet's diminishing numbers. Every decision he made now had to be perfect, or the Empire would be left with nothing but ruin and shame. There was no more room for errors, and no time to waste. The eclipse had shown them how fragile their superiority really was. "We will change the formation," Varix announced, his voice calm but unwavering. "We will force it into a trap. All ships, prepare to converge on the target. We'll make the eclipse fight on our terms." But even as he said it, he knew something that no amount of tactics could prepare him for. The real challenge was not just finding the eclipse. It was trying to outsmart the human pilot. A challenge he realized, only now, was unlike anything the Empire had ever faced before. Admiral Varix's plan was set into motion with military precision. The Empire's fleet, though battered, was still a force to be reckoned with. They would change formation, spread out in a tighter arc, and close in on the eclipse from all angles. They would trap it, box it in, and force it into a direct confrontation. Varix was confident this would end the battle. The eclipse had already caused too much damage, and now it was time to bring the lone human ship to heel. But the moment the new formation was deployed, something happened that Varix had not accounted for. The eclipse wasn't just evading them, it was studying them. From the moment the fleet shifted its position, the eclipse was already calculating its next move. It danced between their ships, silent and invisible, like a predator slipping through the brush. The human pilot seemed to know exactly where to strike, how to avoid the Empire's fire, and which ship to disable next. Varix's ships were being struck before they even realized what was happening. The eclipse wasn't fighting by the rules of war. It was turning their own tactics against them, twisting the very system of control the Empire had built. In the chaos that followed, the Empire's elite ships, designed to work in concert, began to falter. Varix's pride, the dreadnoughts and battle cruisers that once commanded the stars, were now like pieces on a chessboard being picked off one by one. The eclipse moved with the kind of speed and agility that made it impossible to track, and whenever one of the Empire's ships fired, it was already gone. Its position shifted at the last possible moment, leaving only the ripples of wasted fire behind. The first casualty was the Starfire, a mighty dreadnought that had been positioned on the far left of the formation. It was struck by a burst of energy that shredded its port side, causing a chain reaction in its fuel reserves. Within moments, it was engulfed in a violent explosion, the shockwave reaching out to strike nearby ships, throwing them into disarray. The crew aboard the Starfire, didn't even have time to send out a distress signal before the ship was reduced to a cloud of debris. Varix watched the destruction unfold from his flagship. His heart raced, but his mind was cold. He had to stay focused. "Order the fleet to break formation," he barked. "No more clustered targets. We need to spread out, draw the Eclipse into the open." But it was already too late. The Eclipse was ahead of them, already planning its next move. The Titan's wrath launched a volley of fire toward the space where the Eclipse had last been seen. But once again, the human ship was already gone. Varix clenched his jaw as the Eclipse reappeared, this time behind a Crimson Fang, a ship that had just been given the order to retreat. Before the crew aboard the Crimson Fang could react, the Eclipse unleashed a precise strike to the ship's rear engines, completely disabling it. The Crimson Fang drifted lifelessly into the void. "What is this?" one of Varix's officers whispered, his voice shaking as he watched another ship fall victim to the unseen predator. The Empire's once pristine fleet was falling apart. It wasn't just the weapons that were being destroyed, it was their morale. The fleet was becoming a shell of its former self, its once indomitable confidence shattered. Varix's thoughts were interrupted by another message from the command center. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. The Eclipse is targeting our communication arrays, one by one." His worst fears were coming true. They were being picked apart, isolated, and defeated in a way he couldn't predict. The Eclipse wasn't just a ship, it was a force of nature, a storm that moved through their ranks with ruthless efficiency. Varix had been confident that numbers and firepower would win the day, but now he realized something he had never considered. The Eclipse was not just fighting them, it was dismantling them, piece by piece. He stood at the center of the command center, his hands clenched at his sides. His fleet, his pride, was crumbling. And in the midst of it all, the Eclipse seemed to remain as elusive as ever, striking only when it chose, fading into the blackness before they could even react. The battle had taken a turn no one, not even the Empire's finest, could have foreseen. And with each passing moment, Varix's confidence began to crack. Varix stood at the center of the command center, his mind racing as he watched his fleet, once a formidable force, falter before a single human ship. The Eclipse had torn through their ranks with the precision of a surgeon, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. The fleet had been shattered, its cohesion slipping away like sand through fingers. And as each ship fell, so did the Empire's pride. Varix's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to hold on to the last shred of control. He could feel the eyes of his officers on him, waiting for orders, hoping for some glimmer of hope. But there was none to be found. "We're losing them, Admiral," one of his officers said quietly, barely able to mask the panic in his voice. "We've lost contact with 2 more dreadnoughts. The Eclipse has disabled their communications." Varix's jaw tightened. The Eclipse was systematically isolating them, picking off one ship after another, preventing them from communicating with each other. It was a tactic so simple yet so devastating. He could feel the weight of the realization settle on his shoulders. This was no longer a battle. This was a test, and the human pilot was determined to prove that even the mightiest of empires could be broken by a single person's will. "Order the remaining ships to hold position," Varix snapped, his voice cold and commanding. "We will make our stand here." There was a brief moment of hesitation among the officers, but they obeyed. The surviving fleet ships scattered in an attempt to form a defensive perimeter, but the Eclipse had already anticipated their moves. It was like the human pilot had mapped every possible counterattack before they even thought to make one. The fleet scanners went dark again. Another ship was gone. The Eclipse had struck again. But this time, Varix was ready. He could feel the pulse of the battle in his veins, a familiar rhythm, one that he had followed for years. The Eclipse could move faster, strike harder, but it couldn't think faster than him. He would trap it. This time, it wouldn't escape. "Prepare all remaining ships for a concentrated fire," Varix ordered, a fierce determination rising in his chest. "We'll bait it out. When it shows itself, we'll strike with everything we have. The plan was simple, too simple, perhaps. They would use the remaining ships as bait, each ship acting as a decoy while they prepared to focus all their firepower on the eclipse. The human pilot wouldn't be able to dodge them all. With every ship in the fleet trained on one point, the eclipse would have nowhere to hide. But as the fleet executed the maneuver, something felt wrong. The eclipse didn't just reappear. It seemed to materialize in the middle of the formation, right where they had expected it to be. The human pilot didn't play by the rules. They didn't follow the logic of warfare. They made their own rules. Before Varix could issue a command, the eclipse struck again. This time, it wasn't just a single strike. The eclipse had targeted the power cores of 2 different ships, shutting them down before they could react. The ships were left drifting, silent and cold, like ghosts in space. Varix's teeth clenched as he watched another ship fall to the eclipse's relentless attack. His fleet was crumbling, and he had no idea how to stop it. The eclipse was everywhere and nowhere. It was like fighting a phantom, one that knew every move before it happened, one that always seemed to be one step ahead. Varix felt a cold sweat on his brow. How could anyone fight such an enemy? The surviving ships began to retreat, but it was too late. The eclipse had anticipated their every move, and now the few remaining ships were easy targets. One by one, they fell, their shields collapsing under the eclipse's precise hits. Varix watched helplessly as his fleet, his pride, was destroyed. His ships, once symbols of the Empire's might, were now just floating wreckage in the cold vastness of space. The fleet had been outmaneuvered, outfought, and outclassed by a single human pilot. Varix could feel his own confidence unraveling, the realization sinking in deeper with each passing moment. No matter what he did, no matter how many ships he threw at the eclipse, it wasn't enough. His mind spun as he tried to think of a way to turn the tide. But the truth was undeniable. The Empire had underestimated their enemy. And now, in the cold darkness of space, a single human had come to show them just how fragile their power truly was. Varix's eyes flicked over the shattered remains of his fleet, the once proud armada now reduced to smoldering debris, drifting helplessly in the vacuum of space. The eclipse had struck with devastating precision, its human pilot a force of nature that no amount of tactics, no matter how refined, could counter. The few remaining ships of the Imperial fleet were scattered, isolated, and hopeless. A battle that had begun with such confidence was now spiraling toward a catastrophic end. The Admiral stood motionless, the weight of failure pressing down on his chest like an invisible hand. His mind churned, searching for answers that didn't exist. How could one ship, one human, destroy an entire fleet with such brutal efficiency? He had seen many battles, fought against countless enemies, but never had he faced an adversary like this. Never had he witnessed such cold, calculated mastery of the battlefield. On the bridge of the Titan's wrath, the few surviving officers exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale. They had all seen the same thing. The eclipse had moved through their ranks like a shadow, a presence they couldn't touch, couldn't even see until it was too late. And with every ship that fell, their hope dwindled. "Admiral," one of the officers spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've lost contact with the last 3 vessels. It's over. We're out of options." Varix's jaw tightened, his fist clenching. "It is not over," he spat, his voice cold with a determination that defied the hopelessness surrounding them. "We will not surrender to this phantom." But even as the words left his mouth, Varix knew they were hollow. The eclipse had already proven that it could dismantle the Empire's finest fleet, one ship at a time, without breaking a sweat. The human pilot was no ordinary combatant. They were something beyond the scope of Imperial understanding. And now, with nearly all of their ships destroyed, the Empire's might had been reduced to a single flagship, and even that seemed like a fragile, doomed thing in the vastness of space. "Prepare the ship for a full retreat," Varix ordered, though the command felt weak even to his own ears. "We will fight until the last moment." But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. There was no escape. The eclipse was everywhere, and it was closing in on them, patient, relentless, like the calm before a storm. They had no place to run, no place to hide. The ship's advanced sensors were already tracking them, already calculating their every movement. The Titan's raft turned, its engines firing to initiate a retreat, but before it could make any headway, the flashing red alert blared through the bridge. Varix's heart skipped a beat as he saw the incoming data. An energy pulse, unlike anything they had seen before, was heading straight for the ship. "They found us," one of the officers shouted. "Brace for impact." It was too late. The eclipse had struck again. A massive burst of energy slammed into the side of the Titan's Wrath, shaking the entire ship to its core. The shields flared up for a split second, then flickered and died. The ship's outer hull groaned as the blast seared through it, sending tremors through every corridor. The crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel, but it was clear the damage was catastrophic. The Titan's Wrath was no longer a warship. It was a wounded animal, and the human pilot was closing in for the kill. Varix gritted his teeth and slammed his fist onto the console in front of him. "We can't die here. We won't go out like this." His mind raced, his military instincts kicking in, but for the first time in his career, nothing seemed to work. Every maneuver they tried, every tactic, had been anticipated by the eclipse. This wasn't just a battle of firepower anymore. It was a battle of minds, and the human pilot was outthinking him at every turn. Another blast hit the Titan's Wrath, this time rupturing a section of the hull. The lights flickered, and alarms blared, but Varix barely noticed. His focus was on the ship's status, his heart sinking with every failure. And then, from the silence that followed, a voice crackled over the intercom, calm, almost serene, and unmistakably human. "You've lost, Admiral." Varix froze, the words cutting through him like ice. The pilot's voice was clear, confident, as if they had already won. And in that moment, he realized the truth he had been avoiding. The Empire wasn't just being defeated. It was being obliterated by a single human's determination. And for the first time in his life, Varix wondered if the Empire was truly as invincible as it had once seemed. Varix staggered back from the console, his hands gripping the edge of the control panel as the Titan's Wrath shuddered from another hit. The voice over the intercom rang through his mind, chilling him to the core. "You've lost, Admiral." The words echoed, reverberating in the empty spaces of his mind. No, he couldn't lose. The Empire didn't lose, but with every passing second, he felt the truth slipping away. The bridge was a chaos of flashing alarms and desperate shouts. Officers scrambled to assess damage reports, but it was clear that the Titan's Wrath was no longer a flagship. It was a dying ship, its systems failing one by one. Varix's gaze shifted across the crew, their faces pale, filled with fear. They could all see it. The end was coming. "Admiral," one of his officers whispered, the fear in his voice palpable. "The eclipse, it's disabled our engines. We're drifting." Varix's fists clenched tighter. They were vulnerable now, floating in space, helpless. There was no place to run, no place to hide. The eclipse was closing in, its attacks precise, unrelenting. The Empire's pride, its strength, had been reduced to nothing but a fragile wreck in the vastness of the universe. Another blast rocked the ship, sending a wave of heat through the command center. The Titan's Wrath groaned as if it were alive, fighting against the inevitable. Varix could feel the weight of his decisions, the countless battles fought, the enemies vanquished, now meaningless in the face of this single, unrelenting human ship. "We can't fight back," another officer said, his voice breaking. "The eclipse, it's not like anything we've seen. It knows exactly how to destroy us, one piece at a time." Varric stared at the flickering screens, each one showing the demise of his once proud fleet. The dreadnoughts, the cruisers, the entire armada. Gone, all of them reduced to space debris. And now, only the Titan's wrath remained. The human pilot had outsmarted them at every turn, anticipating their every move. The Eclipse wasn't just a ship, it was a force of nature, a nightmare made flesh. "You're right," Varric muttered, his voice barely audible. "It's not like anything we've seen." The weight of the realization sank in. The Empire had always relied on its technology, its numbers, its overwhelming power. But none of that mattered when the enemy knew exactly how to exploit every weakness, every flaw in their strategy. The bridge went silent as the crew watched their screens, waiting for the next attack. And then, as if the human pilot had been waiting for the perfect moment, a new transmission appeared on the central display. It was a simple message, brief but unmistakable. "Admiral Varric, your time is over." Varric's heart sank. The Eclipse wasn't just attacking, they were toying with him, with the Empire. The human pilot knew they had already won. The sheer audacity of it, the confidence, was maddening. And yet, there was no denying it. The Empire had failed. The human pilot had proven that even the most advanced fleet in the galaxy was nothing more than a paper tiger in the face of superior intellect, strategy, and willpower. "Activate the self-destruct sequence," Varric ordered, his voice hollow. There was no other option. The Titan's wrath had been too badly damaged to escape, too far gone to repair. If they couldn't win, they could at least deny the Eclipse the satisfaction of seeing them fall. But before the sequence could begin, another transmission came through. This time, a direct communication, not just a message. It was the pilot's voice again, smooth and calm. "Don't bother, Admiral," the voice said. "I've already disabled your self-destruct. It's over." Varric froze, his mind reeling. The pilot had anticipated that move too. They had thought of everything, every possible escape, every contingency. There was nothing left for them to do. The Titan's wrath had become a tomb, its only purpose now to drift in space, a testament to the Empire's downfall. The silence on the bridge was deafening. The officers looked at Varric, waiting for him to make a decision, but there was no choice left. He had failed. The Empire had failed. And in that moment, Varric understood the true weight of his loss. The Eclipse wasn't just a ship, it was the end of an era. The human pilot had come to show the galaxy that no empire, no matter how powerful, could endure forever. The age of the Empire was over. The Titan's wrath drifted silently through the void, its once proud flag now a symbol of its ruin, as the Eclipse faded into the shadows, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The Titan's wrath drifted, lifeless and broken, as the Eclipse silently hovered in the distance, its engines barely humming. The great Empire, once the ruler of the stars, had been reduced to a single wrecked ship in the endless void of space. Varric stood at the command center, his hands clenched at his sides, his mind a whirl of disbelief. The crew around him was silent, their faces pale, resigned to the fate they had no power to escape. And then the voice of the human pilot crackled again over the intercom, smooth and cold. "Admiral Varric," it said, "you and your fleet were mighty once, but might alone doesn't win wars. You fought a battle of strength, but strength is no match for strategy. I've proven that today. You fought well, but in the end, it wasn't enough." The words hung in the air like a challenge, a mocking reminder of the Empire's arrogance, its belief that power alone could bend the galaxy to its will. But in that moment, Varric realized something that struck him deeper than any defeat ever could. This was not just a defeat, it was a revelation. The Empire had become stagnant, relying too long on its overwhelming force, its vast armies, its technology, forgetting the most important lesson of all: adaptability. "We underestimated you," Varric muttered, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a surrender, but an admission of truth. He had thought of himself as a strategist, a master of battle. But in the face of the eclipse, he had become just another pawn in the game, one who failed to see the bigger picture. "You've done more than just defeat us," Varix continued, turning his gaze to the shattered view screen, the stars outside nothing more than distant points of light. "You've shattered the belief that the Empire is invincible. And that, more than anything, is what will bring it down." The voice of the pilot was silent for a moment, almost as if considering his words. Then it responded, not with mockery, but with a quiet finality. "That was always your greatest weakness, Admiral, believing in invincibility." The bridge was still. No one moved. No one spoke. They could hear the faint hum of the eclipse in the distance, but it was as if the entire universe had gone still, holding its breath. Varix felt the weight of his failure in a way that was beyond his comprehension. It wasn't just the loss of his fleet or his ship. It was the collapse of the Empire itself. It was the slow, creeping realization that empires built on arrogance, on domination, could not endure forever. There would always be something or someone that came along, someone like the human pilot who would tear it all down. "Are you going to finish us off, pilot?" Varix asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the final remnants of his pride slipping away like ash in the wind. There was a long pause before the pilot responded. But this time, there was no malice, no desire for revenge. The voice was calm, almost pitying. "No, Admiral," the voice said softly. "You've already destroyed yourselves. I'm just here to show you the truth. The Empire is no more. It will fade into history, and soon it will be nothing but a forgotten memory." Varix stood motionless as the voice continued. "You may have had strength, but we had the will. And now, that will has won." The eclipse slowly began to retreat, its engines coming to life as it turned away from the Titan's wrath without a second glance. It was done. The battle was over, and with it, the era of the Empire. There was no final shot, no grand explosion. The human pilot had done what no other had been able to do. They had broken the Empire with nothing more than strategy, precision, and a will to succeed that could not be matched. Varix watched as the eclipse faded into the stars, its presence gone as quickly as it had appeared. There was no victory parade, no grand celebration, only the slow realization that everything he had fought for, everything the Empire had built, was gone. And as the last remnants of the fleet drifted in space, all that was left was silence, a quiet, unyielding reminder that all things, no matter how mighty, must eventually fall. And the human pilot, the one who had brought down an empire, was already preparing for the next challenge.